following the ratification of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement by the Kingdom of Eswatini in 2018. The Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Trade, in collaboration with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, held a national AfCFTA consultative forum from the 3rd to the 4th of November 2022 at the Mountain View Hotel. The forum served as a platform for various stakeholders, including government, its departments and parastatals, private business, particularly exporters, and the media, to make contributions how best the kingdom can benefit from the AfCFTA. The consultative forum was officially opened by the Principal Secretary and the Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Trade, Mr. Siboniso Ngambule, who spoke through Ms. Kebile Hlabatsi, who is Acting Principal Secretary.
The role of the private sector is very critical for changing the landscape of the African continent. There is therefore a need for the private sector to collaborate with government and prioritize private-public partnerships in order for us to increase our proactive capacity. Let me also take this opportunity to assure you that the Kingdom of Eswatini is committed to the implementation of the AfCFTA agreement to take full advantage of the opportunities provided for under both trade in goods and trade in services. It is for this reason that we are gathered here today to come up with ideas, strategies and plans on how the AfCFTA agreement can be of benefit to eMaswati and the whole business community. On that note, it is now my distinct honor to launch this national AfCFTA National Consultative Forum for the Kingdom of Eswatini.
United Nations Resident Coordinator, His Excellency Mr. George Wachira, made some remarks before the AfCFTA Secretariat set the tone for the consultative forum.
The Continental Free Trade Agreement or area will create the biggest trade area in the world with a market of more than 1.29 billion people. That's a great number. That's a great number. 1.29 billion people with a combined GDP of more than $3 trillion. How do we make sure that we get a piece of this? So studies are also suggesting that if successful, the Africa's manufacturing sector will double in size, with annual output increasing from $500 billion in 2015 to $1 trillion in 2025, and therefore contributing additional 14 million stable, decent, well-paying jobs. The Continental Free Trade Agreement is not going to happen because it has been signed. It's not going to be self-executing. And therefore, in this meeting, we will require everyone to focus, to deploy deliberate strategies towards ensuring that the private sector, as a key stakeholder in production and trade, is well prepared, well primed to exploit a large market and product opportunities offered by this trade area. As I often do in these settings, and I'm told I'm gaining a nickname, and my new nickname is Connecting the Dots. So, as I often do in these kinds of meetings, I want us to remind ourselves to connect the dots. First, as we develop our strategy, it will be important to keep in mind our demographic structure, which is largely young, creative, and restless. And the question for us as we sit here this morning is how can we devise ideas that bring on board young people to not only benefit, but also to be the drivers, the leaders in this continental endeavor. So that's number one. The second one is that a key conversation regarding employment, trade, job creation in any country, including here in Eswatini, is always cycling back to whether our education systems are producing the right people for our changing world. And you will know that last month, well, not last month, in September, we had an international summit. It was called Transforming Education Summit, where we are addressing this specific question, whether our education systems are keeping in time with the changing world and the realities around us. So how can we develop a vision of the kind of education, training, and attitudes that will ensure that our upcoming generations are well suited to lead the continental trade?
At the Secretariat, again, we are analyzing and synthesizing these national implementation committees. They are already formed in some parts of the state parties, and we keep following the latest development in best practices of these committees. Then we will definitely be sharing with you the lessons learned so that your national implementation committee will benefit from others. We will also provide technical assistance in the areas you deem key for you to benefit from the AfCFTA as well. Now, talking about the implementation, it's an effort to be made by all those who are involved, even if at the center of all this should be the private sector. Businesses, they have to use this huge market being liberalized under the AfCFTA. Of course, together, the government, chambers of commerce, associations, think tanks, academia, the research community, they all have to be involved for meaningful implementation of the agreement and the commitments that Kingdom of Eswatini has made under the AfCFTA.
Speakers from UNECA gave an overview of the support to Eswatini and the development of the AfCFTA national strategy, as well as discussed trade and gender issues.
We started the process a long time ago. We have now gotten to a point where we are organizing this national consultative forum, where we have brought all the key players, hopefully, the private sector, the academia, the civil society, government agencies, to be part of the process. After this process, after this national forum, there are going to be consultations by the consultants that have been engaged to do the job. I think you shall be meeting them in a few minutes. After the consultations, they are going to go into a process of drafting the strategy using the inputs that you will have provided them today and in the subsequent consultations that are going to take place. After the draft is produced, there's going to be an internal review process to make sure that it reflects issues that you guys have pointed out. And then we'll have a validation workshop similar to this one, except that on that day, we'll actually be looking at the draft strategy that will have come out of the processing that I'm just speaking to. And we are hoping that after the strategy is validated, it's going to be launched at a political level by the government of Eswatini, after which it will become a document that will guide Eswatini in implementing the AfCFTA.
The main goal for the AfCFTA is to increase intra-Africa trade. We are at an average of about 15% intra-Africa, and compared to, say, Europe, which is at 53% intra-Europe trade, and the Americas, when I say the Americas, I mean Canada, the USA, and Mexico, is about 60%. Those are three big countries, but they're only three compared to 54 countries at 15%, you know? Okay, what is the AfCFTA in concrete terms? So it means that as a trader, as a private sector, when you take your goods, I've already explained rules of origin. If you meet the rules of origin, if you take your goods from Eswatini to another country, you will pay less taxes or no taxes, depending on what that country has decided to open up. When I say open up, means they've decided that you're going to access their market without paying a duty. So that means that your product will be cheaper in that country, right? Yeah, and it will also compete favorably. Secondly, non-tariff barriers. When I say non-tariff barriers, tariffs are taxes. So anything else that is not tariff related is a barrier that is called a non-tariff barrier,
right? So, for example, if I come and say, I'll use another example of computers. I'm bringing computers, and they have to. You at the border, they tell you, oh, we have to check to make sure that these computers meet our standards. But that checking, it's fine. They have to remove every box. Open every box to make sure that every one of the computers, maybe you've brought 100, actually meet the standard. That's a barrier, because that means that you have to repackage. That's one. That's a cost to you. But also, you have to park at the border, which you're paying for whatever time that checking or verification is done. So some of the things that happen to resolve non-tariff barriers is some kind of recognition from the customs authorities that, oh, if my customs authority in Eswatini has agreed and has given me this stamp, that my product meets the standard, the other customs authority doesn't need to check, because they trust the standards of the other, the verification of the other customs authority,
What gender mainstreaming is basically a strategy to make the concerns of both women and men integral in design, which is the stage we are in now, implementation, monitoring and evaluation of policies, programs, in the political, economic, societal spheres, so that women and men benefit equally and inequality is not propagated. So the ultimate goal of this is gender equality, which is one of the Sustainable Development Goals of that we are party to as countries which are members of the UN. If we come here, we're working together to develop the CFTA strategy for Eswatini. We're not only looking at promoting women, but we are looking at what does the statistics say? What do the demographics say? Where are women employed? Where are men employed? Where are the inequalities? Then you correct that. So if there are inequalities that are related to men, or even disadvantages to men, then strategies are put in place to assist the men up, right? So I just want to get that clear. But most of the time in African countries, the balance is normally against the women. That's why a lot of gender, mainstreaming has been done, biased towards women.
The acting director in the International Trade Department of the Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Trade, Ms. Lungile Dlamini, made a presentation on the status of Eswatini under AfCFTA.
For the implementation of the strategy, it's very crucial that there will be reforms that will be undertaken. So when we develop, we will have what we call a national implementation plan for both goods and services. And that plan, it guides the implementation of the commitments which we have made as a country. I'll make an example. As a country, we have agreed, we'll have the sensitive list for products, which we have agreed that after 10 years or 5 years, it has to be phased out. So as a country, Eswatini will have to indicate in that plan how far we are in terms of implementing our obligations. Hence, we'll then come, when we develop the plan, we'll come back to this very same house, although maybe we'll be having other additional stakeholders, where we will indicate as to when, as Eswatini, we think we can manage to comply with our commitments. And also we will be indicating as to which areas, what reforms needs to be done. Like the private sector, we know, because they are the ones who will be doing the trade. They will identify the challenges, they know the reforms which government has to do. Then they will be telling us, let's say they want a policy to be, a certain law to be reviewed. We will indicate in that plan that by such a time we want that law to be reviewed. It has the timelines. So I find it very proper that as a country we develop this plan so that at least we will be able to comply with the commitments which we have undertaken.
National consultants Zizwe Vilane and Ms. Kangezile Dlamini made a presentation on issues that emerged during earlier presentations.
You are a small market. We are failing to meet local demand. We are importing tamati, we are importing onion. And I always say, before we can start talking about complicated markets that have extreme requirements, Eswatini needs to improve and increase production. We are not producing. If you are not producing, you don't have anything to sell, and you will not grow. So let's go back to the drawing board. Let's build those aggregation systems. Individualism will kill you as Eswatini. You are one farmer, you drive from Lavumisa to buy 1 bag of manure and 1 bag of fertilizer, competing with a farmer on 1,000 hectares across the border for the same shelf at ShopRite, Pick n Pay, and Spar. How are you going to win? So let's start working together, creating those aggregation platforms. Michael E. Porter speaks a lot around clusters in terms of building competitiveness. We need to start thinking around that. Cross-cutting issues have been talked about, I won't bore you. But gender, inclusion of young people. For me, this is a passionate area. 70% of our population is young. The recent political uprisings, combination of factors, but mostly young people asking for opportunity where there is none. If we speak of a demographic dividend, how are we going to get there? For me, having 70% youth unemployment in a continent that's predominantly driven by young people, speaks to that coal mine my sister made an example of. I always say it makes no sense buying a coal mine and then buying security to fence it around and putting security guards and no equipment to take the coal out. But you are just sitting there and guarding the coal. You will die. So Eswatini, let's stop guarding the coal and start creating assets out of the demographic dividend and everything else that we have.
The rationale for this exercise is to promote, starting at the national level, the harmonization of appropriate policies, because we know as a country, Swaziland has a lot of policies, but if they're not talking to each other, then we don't get maximum benefit. We have strategies and measures for the agreement to be fully implemented, for the agreement, for us to fully benefit from the agreement. And one other justification is that in order for us to derive the utmost potential and capacities of all Emaswat service providers or service suppliers, there's a need to have a structured approach. We cannot just take that agreement and put it on the ground. We have to have a structured approach. How are we going to implement the protocol and break it down into chewable pieces?
There were breakaway sessions, with one looking at policy implications in the areas of trade in goods and services, as well as trade facilitation.
We have looked into the trade facilities that measure support women and young entrepreneurs. I think when we look at that, we have to develop a policy collectively that will focus into gender, yes. Although sometimes you might find us we've got questions that they need to be looked into. But we want to make sure that everybody benefits as a country, because I think also in our olden days, we know that we send to school only males. We forget about females. At the end of the day, you find that the very same females, they become the breadwinners of the very same home. So I think we've moved into that. Now we are in a better space now. And also we look into, I've asked a small question in that I'm in production. When we're in production, if again we're given a chance, an opportunity to hire 50-50, let's say I've got 200 employees, then I've got the 100, which of course I say female. If in 3 months I get half of the staff being pregnant, I don't know what will happen, because my policy gives me 3 months to teach each and every person, at least 84 days. So I don't know what will happen to my production. But it's a point that we need to look into, because we are there.
Breakaway Session 2 dealt with maximizing on AfCFTA, focusing on opportunities and challenges for the private sector, as well as the development of value chains.
What kind of support would businesses need to expand their exports of their services to African markets, blah, 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 blah. One of the things that we said we probably need to get going is export or trade finance. You must remember now, if you are dealing in Africa, it's almost totally brand new market for us. We've been dealing with the Europeans, with highly developed infrastructure of payment, trade finance, trade credit guarantees, people how we pay. You're dealing now in Africa, In fact, I wanted to say, how about if we pay each other with Momo, because we don't trust each other. But so there is a relationship that needs to be built. As we explore this market, exporting to Nigeria, etc., importing and all that stuff like that, we still need to develop that infrastructure that works for us. And I'm thinking the banking system or the financial institution systems can come in place with some instruments to ensure that they mitigate any potential risk that could arise as a result of trade, right? That's just one of the issues. But also market information about Africa as a whole. We need intelligence. We do have some, but not comprehensive enough for us to be well equipped to do our job. But also they also ask that government legislative changes, they need to take place in order to ensure that and facilitate the speedier trade, or rather foray into that trade area. Infrastructure, number 3, and mechanization is important to get things going.
Breakaway Session 3, focused on women and youth.
Yes, non-tariff barriers as well. If it's not condescending remarks because you are young, you're probably wanted to somewhere in the sheets because you're a curvy woman to get something out of the border, So those are problems that we encounter. So we acknowledge that we need to be coordinated. As young people, we need to come together. As women, we do need to come together, form associations, support each other, develop the value chain that we are taking accountability of. We do recognize that we need to galvanize the youth, We are also taking part in this, as everyone should in the room. We go to the schools, that's where the young people are. We go to the playgrounds, we go to universities and just galvanize the young people about the AfCFTA and intra-African trade.
Day 2 focused on conscientizing the media on how best to report on AfCFTA issues. The AfCFTA Secretariat gave an update on latest developments pertaining to commitment to the AfCFTA.
And when it comes to the trade in services, we have received 47 schedules of specific commitment. We call it in technical terms schedule of specific commitment. It's a tabular format where you will identify the sectors. First, there are 5 priority sectors that are tabled for liberalization. In the business service sector, you have communication service sector, the financial service, transportation or transport service, and tourism service. Those are the 5 priority sectors that are tabled for liberalization and negotiation. So 47 state parties, or some of them, they are non-state parties, they have submitted their level of commitment within that tabular format. And at the Secretariat, we have verified 16 of them. So, we were here yesterday, and I started by saying that now the AfCFTA is, trade under the AfCFTA is happening. I was just mentioning 2016 was the timeline that we started negotiating. It was just at the negotiation level, but now we are talking about implementation, and trade is actually happening. Between the state parties who have signed and ratified this agreement.
Part of our mission this morning is to try and bring you guys up to speed in terms of the facts about the AfCFTA program, so that when you report, you actually give very accurate information about the program that we are implementing. Since I'm talking to the media, my prime objective this morning is to demonstrate to you that you can report on the CFTA from many, many dimensions, because trade, as you know, affects everyone else. The most important thing, I think, is something that Million also spoke about, the creation of a national AfCFTA committee, whose function is basically to ensure that whatever goes into these committee discussions from Eswatini reflects the interests or the situation of what the people of Eswatini, the business operators of Eswatini, would want to see in the AfCFTA. If there is going to be a conversation about SPS, certainly for that conversation to be useful for Eswatini, it should be informed by those people here in Swaziland that are doing the export and import of agricultural products. So it doesn't become an abstract conversation about the CFTA. So how do we unlock value? The first thing is, let's implement the agreement. I think it starts there. Swaziland is ratified the agreement. So the next logical step is to implement it. And the government has taken the first step of developing a national strategy. Once we have developed that strategy, implement it.
Jacqueline Palmer gave the rationale for AfCFTA strategy and cross-cutting issues.
The strategy of the AfCFTA is to allow for us to intertrade within ourselves better, and then have high-value products instead of only exporting, raw materials or, low-value products that are not processed or manufactured, because that's the reason our trade is also low. Yeah? So that's the main thing. One of the things that already Batanai spoke about is the fact that within ourselves, we are only trading at an average of 15%. If you compare the Americas, which is the USA, Mexico, and Canada, 3 countries, they're trading at 65% amongst themselves. So if you compare, then in the Europe is, I think, 53%. I might have mixed it, I think. No, it's correct. Europe is 53%, while the Americas is 60%. So that's the main issue the goal is to increase trade amongst each other, to increase, and through that trade, we increase industrialization because we are sourcing products cheaply amongst each other. We also can, as services, because we're not talking about commodities anymore, as service providers, we can also trade amongst each other and increase our competitiveness, our efficiency. You learn better, different ways of doing things when you're exposed to how other people are doing it in different parts of the continent. So that's one of the main aims.
As part of the media training, Rose Rono presented a guide to gender mainstreaming and AfCFTA national strategies.
In terms of our approach towards gender mainstreaming, we approach it through looking at doing a gender analysis to just establish what are the key elements that are there in a particular context. For example, in Eswatini, and there's a gender analysis that we've done for Eswatini, which we'll go through. Then also we have the monitoring and evaluation framework. So what gets measured gets done. So if you have a strategy but it does not have a monitoring and evaluation framework, then chances of it, being effective 3 years down the line is very difficult because you've not been able to measure. And this is a really important tool that the media needs to have. That once we've developed that strategy for Eswatini, you need to be able to have this monitoring and evaluation strategy to say that now 3 years down the line, you promised this, and this is what has been done. So you hold, the National Implementation Committee accountable. The communication and visibility plan is really, really important, and the media is very integral in this.
The last day was concluded with a Q&A and media panel.
Now, in terms of how the process is going to unfold from here, this is just the beginning. The National AfCFTA Forum marks the political and technical launch of the process. This is going to be followed by a series of consultations by the 2 consultants that we have engaged, one on trade in goods and the other one on trade in services, reaching out to the key stakeholders to get their inputs that will then form the basis of the formulation of the strategy. After that consultative process, they will be then going into the drafting stage of the document. The drafting will be followed by a peer review, a kind of evaluation of that strategy before it's finally brought to stakeholders for validation. And after the validation, which is more of a technical process, there's going to be a political launch of the national AfCFTA strategy. In terms of when do we expect this process to conclude, we are looking at the first quarter of next year. And as we go along, we're also going to be having some political level engagements with the Parliament in mind, as well as the Cabinet, because ultimately this has to be adopted by Cabinet at some point. So we will carry them along the process, and we are here to support the government of Eswatini in developing this strategy, and we will do just that.
If all goes according to plan, the AfCFTA will present a lucrative market for the 55 members of the African Union, with a combined gross domestic product of $3.4 trillion as it brings together a population of more than 1.3 billion people.